There is a particular kind of silence that does not mean peace. It is the silence that falls over a street corner late at night, when the last honest person has gone home, when the lampposts cast their amber light down onto cracked asphalt like tired sentinels who have long since stopped believing anything good will happen beneath them. It is the silence of a neighbourhood that has learned, through years of small surrenders, to look the other way, to pull curtains, to turn up televisions, to pretend. This was that kind of silence. The street sat on the edge of a working-class borough in San Francisco, somewhere between the waterfront and the hills, in the kind of district where repair shops stood shoulder to shoulder with boarded storefronts, where the smell of engine oil mixed with the distant salt breath of the bay. It was the autumn of 1972. The city was still processing itself. The idealism of the previous decade was thinning at the edges, and something raw, more transactional, more dangerous, had moved into the spaces that idealism left behind. The road itself was fractured, old asphalt patched over older asphalt, seams running through it like fault lines, proof that this street had been broken and poorly mended more than once. A single overhead street lamp buzzed above the intersection, its light spilling in an uneven circle over the ground below, leaving the edges of the block in near total darkness. Parked cars lined the curb, dented, salt-rusted, real. A distant foghorn called out from the bay. Nothing answered, and then engine thunder. A heavy motorcycle rolled into that circle of light, with the unhurried certainty of something that had never once been told to slow down. Its single headlamp swept the intersection like a searchlight, alive and aggressive, cutting through the mist with blunt authority. The engine did not idle softly. It rumbled with a low, chest-felt percussion that vibrated the ground and reminded every living thing nearby exactly who had arrived. Nobody on that street needed to see the rider's patches to know what kind of man sat behind that headlamp. They could feel it in the way the engine refused to quiet itself. Somewhere to the right of the light, a young woman walked alone, paper grocery bag pressed to her chest, head slightly down, moving with the practiced invisible stride of someone who had learned that the fastest way to get home safely was to become unremarkable. She had almost made it, and 40 feet behind her, carrying a small paper bag of his own, a lean young man in a black tracksuit paused at the edge of the lamplight. He watched. He did not move yet, but his eyes had already taken in everything. To understand what happened on that corner, you first have to understand what that block was. It was not simply a street. It was a social organism, a living, breathing geography of unspoken rules, established territories, and collective psychology that anyone who had spent more than 2 weeks in that neighborhood could read as clearly as a posted sign. The corner laundromat had its regulars who knew not to linger past 9. The liquor store 2 doors down had its iron gate that came down at 8:30 sharp, not because of city ordinance, but because the owner, a Korean War veteran named Mr. Cho, had learned from experience what 8:30 meant on a Friday night in this particular district. The street was the kind of place where people developed a specific peripheral vision, a talent for seeing trouble coming from the side while appearing to look straight ahead, where mothers taught their daughters which blocks to cut through and which to walk around entirely, where the neighborhood's informal social hierarchy revealed itself not in offices or boardrooms, but in who occupied the sidewalk and who moved off it without being asked. The motorcycle club that used this stretch of road as a late-night corridor had no formal name on any city registry. They wore their patches like territorial markings, crude stitched insignias on leather that had absorbed years of road grease, sweat, and weather. They were not a large organization, 5 or 6 core members, another handful of loosely affiliated riders who appeared on certain nights, enough to constitute a presence, enough that the local precinct had received complaints which had been duly noted, filed and acted upon with the particular bureaucratic lassitude that such complaints tended to receive when they originated from blocks like this one. The residents knew the pattern. Thursday nights and Fridays the bikes came through. They didn't always stop. Sometimes they simply rode through slowly, engines deliberate, a reminder of presence. Other nights they lingered, and when they lingered, the sidewalks emptied like water draining from a tilted surface. Tonight, only one bike had come. That itself was unusual. One rider, alone, suggested something more personal than territory, something more specific. which made it, in the private calculations of anyone watching from behind a curtained window, potentially more dangerous than the whole group together. The young woman, her name was Mei Lin, 22 years old, a student who worked evening shifts at the print shop on Clement Street, had committed the simple error of being visible. She had her groceries, she had her route. She had 10 more seconds of clear pavement between herself and her apartment building's front door. She did not get those 10 seconds. The bike rolled across her path and stopped. In the windows above the street, curtains shifted very slightly, and then went still. His name was Decker, not a nickname, or if it was, no one who ran with him remembered the original anymore. Decker was a man who had long ago reduced himself to the simplest and most useful version of his own identity, and what remained was considerable. 6 feet and 2 inches of accumulated grievance, wrapped in a leather riding jacket so old and dark it had become almost architectural, stiff across the shoulders, cracked at the elbows, covered in patches that documented years of road miles, and a particular philosophy about how the world owed him things it had thus far failed to deliver. He was not young, but he was not old in the way that softens men. He was old in the way that hardens them. His beard was thick, grey-streaked, and gave his face a density that matched the rest of him. His hands on the handlebars were the hands of someone who had used them for work, for violence, and for both simultaneously, and saw no meaningful distinction between the two. He had the physical confidence of a man who had spent many years being the largest, loudest, most immovable thing in any room he entered, and who had found that this quality, consistently demonstrated, solved most problems before they became problems. Decker had a history with this block that was neither famous nor secret. He had, over the preceding months, developed a habit of slowing near the print shop where Mei Lin worked. He had spoken to her once through the shop window, and when she had been polite but brief, the professional politeness of someone managing an unwanted interaction, he had interpreted this not as disinterest, but as a puzzle requiring more persistent effort. This was a significant misreading, but Decker was not historically a man who tolerated being corrected. He had not followed her tonight. Not exactly. He had simply known her route and her schedule, and made himself available at the intersection point. In his own estimation, this was neither threatening nor inappropriate. It was initiative. He killed the engine. The silence that followed was enormous. He swung one leg off the bike with the comfortable ease of a man who owned the ground he stepped onto, and he pointed, one heavy arm extending, one finger levelled directly at Mei Lin, like a man indicating something that already belonged to him. The gesture said, "You, stay." It was not a request. Mei Lin stopped walking, not because she wanted to, because her body made the split-second calculation that movement away would provoke faster movement toward. She held her grocery bag against her chest like a shield that both of them knew was not a shield. Her eyes did not find anyone to look at for help. The windows stayed curtained, the street stayed empty, almost empty. He had come from the small Asian grocery store on the far end of the block, the one that stayed open late because the owner, old Mr. Huang, believed that a shop with its lights on kept bad things at bay. Bruce Lee had stopped there for rice vinegar and ginger, and 2 items he couldn't find in the larger market uphill. He was in San Francisco between production commitments, staying with a friend in the Sunset District, and had offered to cook that evening the way he offered most things, without ceremony, as a simple natural extension of caring. He was 29 pounds lighter than Decker. He was 4 inches shorter. He was carrying a paper bag. These were the observable facts of Bruce Lee's arrival at that intersection on that particular night, and they were the only facts that Decker would have noted had he noticed Bruce at all, which, for the first several seconds, he did not. Bruce stood at the edge of the lamplight and watched. There was a quality to his stillness that was difficult to describe without sounding imprecise, but the closest honest description is this. He occupied space in a different way than most people did. Not more space, actually less. He was compact, contained, but there was a density to that containment, an impression of enormous internal organization, as though every system within him was running at high efficiency and could, with no warm-up and no warning, redirect entirely toward any purpose. It was the stillness of something that had earned its stillness, a compressed readiness that looked, to the untrained eye, like passivity. His eyes moved. They moved the way a practitioner's eyes move, not with a wide, unfocused sweep of alarm, but with the calm, precise inventory of someone reading a situation for every variable simultaneously. He read Decker's weight distribution. He read the way Decker's shoulders sat. He read the distance between the man and the girl, the angle of the pointing arm, the position of the bike. He read the empty windows. He read Mei Lin's feet, which were angled slightly away from Decker, poised to run if a clear lane opened. He noted all of this without expression. A man walking past him in that moment would have seen only a lean young Asian man pausing on a sidewalk with a grocery bag, perhaps checking his surroundings before crossing. Nothing remarkable, nothing that suggested what was already being decided quietly behind those dark, watchful eyes. He set the grocery bag down against a lamppost with the careful ease of someone who expected to pick it up again shortly. Then he stepped forward into the light. He came forward at a measured pace, not slow enough to seem hesitant, not fast enough to announce aggression. It was the pace of a man who had decided to be somewhere and was simply proceeding there with absolute certainty about the outcome. His hands were loose at his sides. His chin was level. His face carried the expression of someone who had already processed the situation and arrived at the necessary conclusion without drama. Decker heard the footsteps and turned. What he saw did not immediately register as a threat. A young Chinese man, slight of frame, dark hair swept back, in a black tracksuit with white striping along the sleeves. No leather, no bulk, no markers of belonging to anything Decker recognized as relevant. The kind of man that, in Decker's taxonomy of the world, did not exist in the category of things to concern himself with. He turned back to Mei Lin. "You should go home," Bruce said. The voice was even, not loud, not performing calm, actually calm the way a tuning fork is calm until it is struck, and then resonates with precise, unwavering clarity. Decker's head turned back toward him more slowly this time. "You talking to me?" he asked. "I am," Bruce said. Decker studied him for a long moment, performing a calculation that took less than 2 seconds and arrived at the wrong answer. The lean frame, the grocery bag left against a post somewhere behind him, the complete absence of any visible reason to be afraid. Decker smiled, and the smile was not a pleasant thing. It was the smile of a man who had done this before many times and knew how it ended. "Walk away," Decker said. "Before you do something you'll regret." Mei Lin had taken a half step back. Her eyes moved between the two men with the rapid, calibrating focus of someone trying to determine whether this new development had made her situation better or significantly worse. Bruce did not walk away. He also did not answer immediately. He simply looked at Decker with an expression of such complete, untroubled assessment, the way a craftsman examines a problem he already knows how to solve, that something in the air between the two men changed temperature, not visibly, not loudly, but Decker felt it. For the first time, the smile thinned slightly at its edges. "Last chance," he said, and in saying it, he placed both boots on the pavement and straightened his full height, letting the architecture of himself fill the light. Bruce's eyes did not move to the height. They stayed where they were. "She's going home," Bruce said quietly. "And so are you," the street exhaled. What happened next happened slowly, and then all at once. Decker moved away from his bike with the ponderous authority of a man who had committed to something and would not be walked back from it. Each step on the cracked asphalt was deliberate, a sound as much as a movement, the rhythmic announcement of mass displacing ground. He rolled his shoulders once, and the leather of his jacket tightened across his back like a hide being stretched. His hands came up from his sides, not raised in any formal posture, but hanging forward, open, the way that men who have always relied on their size carry their hands when they intend to use them. He was not technical. He had never needed to be. Bruce did not retreat. He did not adjust his position demonstrably. His weight shifted, imperceptibly to anyone watching casually, but fundamentally quietly, settling lower, redistributing itself with a subtle precision that had nothing theatrical about it. His feet found the exact spacing they needed without him looking down. His spine lengthened slightly. His hands, still loose, moved a fraction toward their center. None of this announced itself. The street lamp hummed above them. Somewhere up the block, a dog registered the change in atmosphere and began barking before going abruptly quiet, as animals will when whatever they have sensed is beyond their comprehension. Mei Lin had pressed herself back against the wall of a darkened storefront, clutching her bag to her ribs, her breath visible in the cold autumn air, thin white threads of it coming quickly, the breathing of someone watching a situation they cannot stop and cannot fully process. Decker came in fast, not cautiously, fast. A man his size and history did not approach situations like this cautiously. He covered the ground between them in 2.5 strides, his right arm loading back as he came, a sweeping strike that carried behind it every pound of accumulated certainty that he was the most dangerous thing on this street. Bruce moved, not away, sideways, a single fluid lateral step that removed him from the path of the strike, the way water removes itself from a stone dropped into it, not by resisting, but by simply not being there. Decker's arm swept through empty air and the momentum of it pulled his balance fractionally forward. In that fraction, Bruce's left hand found Decker's wrist, not gripping it fiercely, touching it, redirecting it with a guidance so brief and precise it barely seemed like contact at all. Decker stumbled half a step, caught himself, and turned. The expression on his face had changed. Not to fear, not yet. But something had flickered there, briefly and against his will, the first cold touch of uncertainty. Decker reset himself. He was not the kind of man who processed a single confusing moment as evidence of anything systemic. He was the kind of man who recategorized anomalies as errors and tried again with more force. He came again, both hands this time a grab attempt, arms wide to remove the possibility of evasion, using the span of himself as a net. Bruce slipped inside it. The movement was interior, intimate and utterly economical, a compression of his own frame that took him beneath Decker's reaching arms in the same instant that his right forearm rose to check the inside of Decker's left elbow, breaking the structural line of the grab before it could close. He didn't punch. Not yet. He simply occupied the space that Decker's arms had been trying to seal off, and from that position, directly inside the reach, he delivered a short palm strike to Decker's sternum, barely 6 inches of travel, no wind-up, no theatre. The sound of it was flat and dense. Decker's chest absorbed it, but his balance did not. He took 2 stumbling steps backward, boots scraping the broken asphalt, arms windmilling once for equilibrium. He stopped himself against the flank of his own motorcycle, and the bike rocked on its stand. There was a moment. In that moment, 2 or 3 curtains in the windows above the street had moved aside. They would not admit this later, but they were there, faces pressed to glass in darkness, watching something that did not fit the established rules of this block. Decker's breath had changed. Not ragged, not yet, but altered, faster, shallower, the involuntary recalibration of a body that has encountered something its prior experience did not contain a category for. He looked at Bruce with eyes that were working harder than they were used to working, trying to find the explanation, trying to locate the trick or the leverage that would restore the expected order of events. Bruce stood where he was, weight still, face still. He was not pressing, not chasing. He had taken no aggressive step toward Decker since the exchange began. Everything he had done had been reactive, precise, minimal and final in its effect, but reactive. He was teaching, though Decker did not know that, and the lesson was still in its early chapters. Decker lunged, this time lower, targeting the body, a wrestler's instinct asserting itself when the standing exchange had failed, trying to get his arms around Bruce, trying to bring the size differential back to where it was useful, trying to make it a problem of mass and gravity. Bruce's hip turned, a single rotation. His right hand came down over Decker's reaching right arm in a circular motion, folding it, redirecting the energy of the lunge into the ground instead of into his torso. At the same time, his left knee came up, controlled, measured, and met Decker's advancing thigh with a short, sharp check that buckled the man's drive and left him folded forward, one knee touching asphalt. Silence, the kind that has weight. Decker knelt on the broken pavement of his own street and breathed. He rose. Men like Decker always rise, at least once more. Not from composure, not from strategy, but from something older and more biological, the refusal of the body to accept what the mind has not yet formally authorized. He rose from one knee with a sound somewhere between a grunt and a growl, and he came one final time. It was not elegant, it was not measured, it was simply everything he had left, consolidated into a single forward commitment, both arms driving, head down, all of his weight and all of his history and all of his identity compressed into the momentum of that charge. Bruce Lee did not step aside this time. He stepped into the charge, into the center of it. His feet settled on the asphalt with a soundless certainty, and his body rotated at the waist with a speed that should not have been possible in a space so small, a rotation so complete and so controlled that it transferred every ounce of Decker's forward energy across Bruce's hip and redirected it violently toward the ground. Decker left his feet, not dramatically, not cinematically. He simply rose briefly, and then the cracked asphalt of that intersection came up to meet him with an authority that left no room for discussion. He hit the ground hard, and he did not get up, not because he was unconscious, not because he was broken, but because something had run out, some essential fuel that had been burning since the moment he'd rolled that motorcycle into the lamplight, and it was gone now, depleted by the relentless efficiency of a man who had not wasted a single movement, a single breath, a single gram of force on anything beyond what was necessary. Decker lay on the pavement and stared at the amber sky above the street lamp, and for perhaps the first time in a very long while, he was quiet. The windows above the street were still, but they were no longer curtained, faces in the dark, men and women of the block watching something they would not discuss openly in the days that followed, but would carry privately, the memory of it lodged somewhere important, referenced unconsciously in small decisions and slight adjustments for months afterward. Mei Lin stood against the wall of the darkened storefront, her grocery bag still pressed to her chest, and she looked at Bruce Lee with an expression that could not settle on a single emotion. The fear had not fully cleared yet, but beneath it something had opened, a disbelief that was edging carefully toward relief. Bruce stood above Decker. He was not breathing hard. Bruce Lee did not stand over the fallen man in the way that men who have won something tend to stand. There was no spreading of presence, no expansion into the space that had been vacated. He simply stood there, weight balanced, expression unchanged, watching Decker breathe against the pavement with the dispassionate attention of someone confirming that a necessary thing had been completed. Then he stepped back. He turned toward Mei Lin. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was the same as it had been at the beginning of the conversation. Even, present, without the artificial gravity of someone performing a heroic exit. He might have been asking whether she needed help carrying her groceries. She shook her head once, then found her voice. "No," she said, "I'm not hurt." He nodded. On the pavement, Decker had pushed himself into a seated position, back against the tire of his own motorcycle. His helmet had tilted sideways. His breath was coming in controlled pulls now, the kind of breathing a man does when he is working to restore his composure because nothing else is available to restore. He was looking at Bruce Lee with an expression that was no longer anything as simple as anger or contempt. It was the expression of a man encountering the limit of his own map, the edge where his understanding of himself and the world around him had always said here be nothing, and had been proven comprehensively wrong. Bruce turned to look at him. "Go home," Bruce said, not harshly, not triumphantly. It was the same voice with which he had said it the first time, which somehow made it more complete rather than less. Decker said nothing. After a long moment, he put one hand on his motorcycle's frame and began the slow process of getting to his feet. Nobody moved to help him. Nobody moved to stop him. He swung his leg over the bike and he sat there for a moment, engine off, hands on the bars, looking at the cracked asphalt beneath his headlamp, the way a man looks at a road he has been travelling for years and is only now seeing clearly. Then he started the engine. It didn't thunder the way it had when he'd arrived. It was the same mechanical sound, the same cubic inches of displacement, the same iron and combustion. But something in how it landed on the air was different. It was smaller, not because it had changed, but because the man sitting behind it had been reduced to a more accurate size. He rode away. The sound diminished, turned a corner, and was gone. Bruce walked back to the lamppost where he had left his grocery bag, checked that nothing had been damaged in the fall, and returned toward Mei Lin. Around him, a few of the curtains above shifted open further. Someone on the second floor of the apartment building across the street was fully visible in their window now, making no attempt to hide. An older man in a white undershirt, leaning on his elbows on the sill, watching. "He'll remember tonight," Bruce said quietly, more to himself than to anyone. He glanced at Mei Lin. "Let me walk you to your door." She looked at him for a moment, this lean, calm, unremarkable young man with his paper bag of groceries who had stepped into the centre of something ugly and rearranged it with what had appeared to be almost no effort at all, and she simply said, "Okay." They walked up the block together. Behind them, the lamppost continued its buzzing. The cracked asphalt was still. The fog came in a little more thickly from the bay, and the windows of that building, one by one, went back to being windows. There is a version of this story that people on that block told for years afterward, passed between neighbours with the careful syntax of something that must be retold accurately, or not at all. The details shifted slightly with each telling, the way all witness things do. But the essential truth of it remained fixed. A man arrived with the intention of making himself large at someone else's expense, and he encountered something that revealed, without cruelty and without hesitation, exactly how limited that intention was. Bruce Lee never spoke of it publicly. He was not, by nature, a man who banked on episodes of this kind for currency. He trained in the mornings, he wrote in the afternoons, he cooked for the people he cared about in the evenings. He moved through the world with the practical, philosophical conviction that most of what one carries into any encounter, assumption, bluster, the weight of reputation, the armour of size or status or history, is precisely the thing that makes a person most vulnerable. Not because the world is always watching, but because those attributes, when leaned upon too heavily, eventually replace the one thing they were supposed to protect, the actual self. Decker was a man who had lived so long inside the authority of his physical presence that he had ceased to develop anything beneath it. He had substituted the impression of danger for the discipline of competence, and had never been placed in a situation that required him to know the difference. Until that night. What Bruce demonstrated on that cracked intersection was not simply technique. It was not simply speed or strength or the product of a superior fighting tradition. It was something older and less categorizable. It was the difference between a man who is trained to overcome resistance and a man who is trained to understand it, between a man who fights to win and a man who moves to reveal what is already true. The girl got home safely. That was the point. Not the fall on the asphalt, not the assessment from the windows above, not the motorcycle retreating into the fog. Those things happened because of what preceded the moment Bruce stepped forward, which was simply a decision made without anger and without hesitation that something wrong would not continue to happen within his sight. No philosophy was announced that night. No lesson was posted. Bruce picked up his groceries, walked a young woman to her door, said goodnight, and walked home through the fog to cook dinner for his friend. But there is a truth in what he did that outlasts the incident itself. The people on that block did not become fearless after that night, but they became, quietly and without discussing it, slightly less willing to look away. As though they had been shown, in the most direct possible terms, what it looks like when a person refuses to calculate the cost of doing what is right before doing it. The street stayed cracked. The fog kept coming in from the bay. The lamp-post kept buzzing in its amber circle. But something had been demonstrated on that corner that the pavement remembered, even when the people began to forget the details. The man with the grocery bag had walked out of the darkness and walked back into it, and the darkness between those two moments had been measured, found ordinary, found manageable, found much smaller than it believed itself to be. That is what mastery does when it does not announce itself. It arrives. It clarifies, it leaves, and the world it passes through is never quite the same configuration it was before.